Tehran, winter of 1967. The city is a mosaic of yellow street lamps and cigarette smoke, of shawls and overcoats moving through narrow sidewalks slick with melted snow. It is 1:42 a.m. on a Thursday when a white Paycon sedan turns off Keshavarz Boulevard and climbs toward the quieter northern streets. Behind the wheel, a man in his 40s rubs at his tired eyes, the glow of his dashboard clock reflected in wire-framed glasses. His name, though almost no one on these streets knows it, is Dr. Fareed Navabi, a nuclear physicist whose equations are whispered over in embassies from Cairo to Tel Aviv. The car's heater wheezes as he passes a darkened bakery, then a shuttered cinema with posters peeling off the wall. At the corner ahead, an ambulance sits at an angle, with its hood up, hazard lights blinking weakly, a lone paramedic waving a gloved hand as if begging any driver for help. Fareed frowns, slows, and rolls down his window a crack, the cold air knifing in as the paramedic jogs toward him, breath visible in the night. What Fareed cannot see, parked in the shadow of a sycamore tree 50 meters back, is the second car, a dull blue Opel with its engine idling, and 4 people inside who have been waiting for this precise moment for 6 painstaking months. To Tehran, it is just another quiet night in the Shah's city, a capital humming with oil, money, and American jazz. To a handful of men in Tel Aviv, it is the night an entire nuclear trajectory might bend. If they fail, the Shah's secret police will tear apart their networks, Israel's fragile back channel with Iran may die in the cradle, and Fareed's knowledge will likely fuel a program in Cairo that could erase Tel Aviv from the map in a decade. As the paramedic leans into the Paycon's window, his Farsi touched by the faintest foreign inflection as a gloved hand rests just a moment too long on Fareed's wrist, the operation quietly known as Farzlight moves from planning to reality. In less than 15 minutes, if every calculation is correct, Tehran will lose a citizen, the Middle East will lose a scientist, and somewhere deep beneath the Negev desert, an unfinished reactor will gain the one mind it has been waiting for. To his neighbors in Tehran, Fareed Navabi is a quiet academic with a respectable post at the University of Tehran, the sort of man who nods politely on the stairwell and carries home brown paper parcels of books. He was born in Shiraz in 1924 to a pharmacist father and a mother who taught girls to read in a back room of their house. As a boy, he dismantled radios and rebuilt them into crude transmitters, sending ghostly music across alleys. A scholarship took him to Paris after the war, where he studied nuclear physics in lecture halls, still scarred by occupation. His brilliance was not in grand theories, but in systems, making complex designs leaner, safer, more efficient. In 1957, the Shah's government, eager to modernize and to impress Western patrons, lured him back with promises of laboratories and influence. He became a key advisor in what the regime called Atoms for Peace, a civilian research program with quiet military potential humming beneath the paperwork. To his wife, he is a man who forgets to eat when he is working, who scribbles on napkins in cafes and leaves chalk on his cuffs. To his students, he is demanding but fair, insisting that physics is just politics measured in different units. But to Israeli intelligence, he is something else entirely. In a windowless office in Tel Aviv, a photograph of him taken on a Paris street in the late 1950 seconds has sat on a corkboard for years, pinned beside grainy images of experimental reactors in Egypt and reports of Soviet technicians arriving in Alexandria. Intercepts suggest that Fareed has quietly advised more than one Arab delegation, explaining how civilian facilities can be configured with subtle adjustments to yield something closer to a weapon. They call him Hamashva, the equation, because he is not just a man. He is the missing variable in every future calculation of who in the region will first master the atom for war. Killing him might slow things down, but stealing him, taking his mind, and redirecting it could reshape the balance entirely. The problem is that he lives in the heart of a friendly capital, guarded not by walls and bodyguards, but by decorum, diplomacy, and the Shah's pride. He is not a terrorist leader hiding in safe houses. He is a guest at embassy dinners, a man whose absence would be noticed at faculty meetings and royal receptions. To get to him, Any service would have to cross not only borders, but etiquette, and in the 1,960 seconds, that is almost more dangerous. The path that leads to the Paycan sedan idling by the broken ambulance begins months earlier in a conference room smelling of coffee and cigarette smoke on King George Street in Tel Aviv. Maps of the Middle East lie unfurled across a long table, edges curling, covered with transparent overlays marked in neat ink reactor sites, training institutes, research centers. At the head of the table, the director of Israel's foreign intelligence listens as an analyst, barely in his 30s, outlines the latest findings from Paris and Vienna. The analyst's conclusion is simple and chilling. While Israel races to complete its own ambiguous nuclear capability, the Arab world is quietly cultivating minds, like Fareed, to catch up. Not just facilities, but talent men who can interpret dense technical manuals, foresee design flaws, and improvise around embargoes. Removing Fareed from the board would not topple a regime, but it would poke a small, precise hole in their future. The question is how. A killing in Tehran would ignite a scandal, humiliate the Shah, and perhaps push Iran into the arms of Israel's enemies. The Americans, who are building their own partnership with Tehran, would be furious. In a second, smaller meeting days later, the tone shifts. A veteran operations officer suggests an alternative: capture. Not a bullet on a dark street, but a disappearance. A man who goes out one night and never comes home, allowing rumors to fill the vacuum defection to the Soviets, secret illness, scandal. If done cleanly, Iran can pretend it does not know. Israel can pretend it has nothing to do with it. The world can move on. The codename, chosen by a clerk flipping through a list of ancient provinces, is Farslight. On paper, it is a contingency operation to acquire high-value technical human resource from hostile proximate environment. In reality, it is the planned theft of a human being from the center of an allied capital. Debate echoes through ministries. The foreign ministry worries about oil and trade. The defense establishment talks about survival in a region menaced by larger, better-armed neighbors. A final meeting with the Prime Minister ends in a silence that lasts almost a minute. Then, a nod. "If we do this," he says, "there can be no trace, not one footprint in the snow." With that sentence, a line is crossed. A team is quietly formed, drawn from case officers who speak fluent Farsi, technicians who can improvise in the field, and one doctor whose calm demeanor hides his experience in less than legal anesthesia. Somewhere, Fareed continues to lecture and attend dinners, unaware that his life has just shifted from academic to target. The first men to hunt Fareed in Tehran do not carry guns. They carry notebooks, cameras the size of cigarette packs, and the bland smiles of foreign engineers, aid workers, and cultural attachés. They arrive over weeks, never in a group large enough to raise eyebrows, each with a backstory rehearsed until they can answer questions half asleep. Norwegian hydrologist, Italian trade representative, French researcher in Persian poetry. They rent apartments in different districts and spend their days doing something far more patient than chasing. They watch. They map his life in increments of 15 minutes. Where he buys bread in the morning, which driver from the university motor pool he trusts for late-night trips, how long he lingers in the faculty lounge after lectures, and who joins him for cigarettes on the balcony. They follow not every day too risky, but in fragments, later stitching their notes together in rented rooms whose curtains never open. One week reveals that Fareed spends most evenings at home, a family man, reading in an armchair while his children squabble over radio programs. Another week shows a pattern of late-night trips north, toward a private laboratory funded quietly by the royal court. There, lights burn past midnight as a handful of scientists run experiments that, on paper, concern medical isotopes. The watchers note that on those nights he sends his driver away and walks the last few blocks alone, preferring the cold air to clear his head before entering the lab. That small piece of arrogance, confidence, and familiar streets is underlined 3 times in a notebook in Farsi, and again, later, in Hebrew. They watch what he trusts. A particular pharmacist who fills his prescriptions. An Armenian mechanic who tunes his Paycan. A particular brand of cigarettes always in his pocket. And they watch when he relaxes. Friday afternoons with his family in a park where children scream around a carousel. A weekly visit to his mother's modest apartment, where he arrives alone, leaving his government car behind. Bit by bit, a vulnerability emerges. The late-night walk to the lab, when his security is the thin cloak of routine. The streets are quiet, police patrols infrequent, and the lab's guards assume that anything that happens outside their fence is not their problem. He walks that route twice a week, almost always at the same time, almost always alone. They weren't just watching where Fareed went, an operations officer later notes in a report. They were watching how he moved, what he trusted, and when he relaxed. That sentence will become the line on which the entire operation balances. When the team regroups in Europe to collate their findings, the whiteboard in a nondescript safe house fills quickly. On one side, possible locations, university, home, mother's apartment, private lab. On the other, methods, street snatch, staged traffic accident, false medical emergency. Each option is weighed not for excitement, but for silence. A strike on university grounds would be too public, a spectacle of screaming students and security guards. Taking him from home risks witnesses who will remember faces. The private lab offers controlled access, but tightens the circle of suspects to colleagues and guards. The late-night walk, by contrast, gives them exactly what they want: darkness, routine, and plausible deniability. They settle on a scenario that can be explained away as bad luck in a city where traffic deaths are common. A stalled ambulance at a corner Fareed always passes. A medic waving desperately, flagging down the nearest car for help with a supposedly dying patient. Inside the ambulance, no patient. Only a neatly arranged interior ready for a very different kind of emergency. The unit chosen for the job is a small, deniable team. 4 operatives fluent in Farsi, 1 doctor with experience in field sedation, and a driver who has navigated Tehran's streets before under diplomatic cover. Their identities are built piece by piece. A French agricultural consultant, a Lebanese businessman, a Swiss technician. Passports, forged in a quiet office in Europe, are aged with careful scuffs and coffee stains. They rehearse the kidnapping not in Tehran, but on a training ground in the Negev, where cardboard buildings stand in for Tehran's streets and an old ambulance is painted with a red crescent. They practice again and again, hood up, hazard lights on, medic's body language just desperate enough to disarm suspicion. The doctor times how long it takes to administer a measured injection under the guise of checking a pulse seconds, not minutes. They walk through contingencies. What if Fareed refuses to stop? A second car is positioned a few blocks ahead to engineer a minor collision. What if a passing police patrol stops to help? The medic has forged hospital documents and a script about a heart patient in crisis. What if Fareed collapses too quickly, slumping on his horn? The doctor demonstrates how to keep his head upright and calm. "We rehearsed every scenario," one of the operatives later recalls. The drunk policeman, the curious neighbor watching from a window, the engine that wouldn't start. If anything broke the pattern, we would abort. There would be other nights. With the plan fixed, they drift into Tehran over several days, entering via different flights and cities, checking into separate hotels. The ambulance, a genuine Iranian vehicle purchased through a string of middlemen, is quietly repainted and fitted with a hidden compartment beneath the stretcher. The only thing they cannot rehearse is the feel of the Tehran cold, the smell of its diesel, the sound of the call to prayer rolling over the rooftops as the clock moves toward the moment the plan will either work or unravel. The operation goes live on a night chosen as carefully as any equation. It is cold enough that breath hangs in the air, discouraging loiterers, but not so cold that a broken-down ambulance will look absurd. A light fog curls in the streetlights, blurring outlines, softening edges. At 1:20 a.m., the ambulance takes its position at the designated corner, hood up, hazard lights pulsing orange into the darkness. Inside, the team moves with the smooth, economical gestures of people who have done something similar many times in other cities with different languages. The medic steps out, adjusts his wool cap, and rehearses his mask of worry once more in the side mirror. 2 blocks away, the blue Opel glides to a halt under the sycamore, engine idling, its driver watching the empty road in his rearview mirror. At 1:38 a.m., as predicted from weeks of observation, the distant growl of the Paykan's engine appears, then its headlights. The medic steps out into the road, waving his arm in wide arcs, shouting in accented but urgent Farsi about a patient losing consciousness, about a heart that might stop at any moment. Farid slows, frowns, and brings the Paykan to a stop beside the ambulance. In a city where accidents are frequent and ambulances not always well supplied, the sight is plausible enough. He rolls down his window. "Doctor," the medic says, forcing just enough panic into his voice. "Please, Khanum, just 1 minute. My colleague is alone, in the back with the patient. He needs help. You are a doctor, aren't you?" It is a calculated lie. They know Farid is not a physician, but the appeal to his expertise, to his ego, is the bait. Farid hesitates, then sighs, kills the engine, and climbs out, pulling his coat tighter against the cold. The medic ushers him to the rear doors, babbling about chest pains, about a weak pulse. The doors swing open. Inside, the lights are dim, the interior neat. Farid steps up, ducking his head, and in that small, vulnerable movement, the operation tips. The doctor is waiting just inside, stethoscope around his neck, syringe concealed in his sleeve. As Farid reaches for the imaginary patient, a hand clamps his shoulder, another grips his wrist, and the needle finds the vein under the guise of checking a pulse. The sedative is fast. His protest dies in his throat, the world tilting. For a split second, he sees the medic's eyes lose their panic, becoming flat and professional. Then the floor rushes up. Outside, the street remains empty. The medic closes the doors, bangs twice, a prearranged signal, and jogs back to Farid's car. In one smooth movement, he slides into the driver's seat, restarts the Paykan, and drives it down the street toward a side alley where it will later be abandoned with its doors locked, giving the impression of a man who simply never returned. Inside the ambulance, the team straps Farid to the stretcher. Oxygen mask over his face, a blanket pulled up to his chin. He looks for all the world like a sleeping heart patient. There is one moment of danger when a police car rolls past, its occupants glancing briefly at the ambulance. The medic leans out, shouts something about a transfer to a hospital in the north, waves a clipboard with forged papers. The police barely slow. In a city where emergencies are constant, this one is unremarkable. Within minutes, the ambulance is moving, siren off, slipping through side streets toward a safe apartment where new documents and a different vehicle wait. By dawn, Farid will be on a flight out of Iran under a name he has never heard, his photograph pasted into a passport that says he works in trade, not physics. By the time anyone in Tehran realizes he is missing, he will be far over another country, strapped to another stretcher, still asleep. Morning in Tehran begins like any other. Vendors roll up metal shutters, buses belch smoke, and the city shakes off the cold night. In an apartment in a respectable middle-class building, a woman pauses at the kitchen table, frowning at the untouched teacup her husband left the night before. He sometimes stays late at the lab, but he always calls. She checks the telephone lines, listens again for the clatter of his key in the lock. It does not come. At the university, colleagues notice his absence from a morning meeting, mumble about overwork, assume a late night turned into illness. At noon, his wife calls the lab and the university, then the hospital, voice growing tighter with each polite non-answer. By late afternoon, a report lands on a desk in a nondescript building belonging to SAVAK, the Shah's feared secret police. A professor with royal connections, missing for nearly a day, last seen driving his Paykan north. Within hours, unmarked cars begin combing the streets, questioning attendants at petrol stations, guards at the private lab, traffic police on night patrol. They find the Paykan first, parked crookedly in a side street where it looks as if it had been abandoned in a hurry. There is no blood, no broken glass, no sign of struggle. The keys are gone. Some agents argue that he staged his own disappearance, ran away with a mistress, defected to the Soviets, fell into debt. Others, more experienced, see the empty car and feel a different kind of absence, professional, surgical. There is one odd detail. A fruit seller remembers an ambulance on that corner late at night, its hazard lights blinking. He had assumed there was an accident, But when he looked again, both vehicles were gone. Savak checks with hospitals. No record of an ambulance in distress. No late-night cardiac arrest matching Fareed's description. The inconsistency scratches at them. Officially, the case is handled quietly. There is no newspaper headline, no public appeal for information. The Shah's government does not like to admit that important men can simply vanish from its capital. In staff rooms and smoky cafes, rumors swirl. Some whisper that he was caught spying for the Americans. Others that he sold secrets to Moscow and fled. A few, more daring, mention the name of a small country on the Mediterranean whose intelligence service has long arms and longer memories. In Tel Aviv, the public line is simple: no comment. There are no triumphant announcements, no leaks to the press. The only trace is a brief coded cable flashing through secure channels, noting that the package has arrived and is cooperative under controlled conditions. Behind closed doors, governments shift in their chairs. Iranian officials send discreet inquiries to allies. American diplomats, when they hear the rumor, ask careful questions they already suspect they do not want answered. On paper, Fareed becomes one more missing person case, a file that sits in a drawer marked unresolved. In reality, he is alive in another country, waking slowly in a room with unfamiliar ceiling tiles, trying to remember the last thing he saw before the darkness. In a secure facility far from the public eye, the man once known as the Equation sits across from men who call him by his first name in heavily accented Farsi. They offer tea, medical care, and, eventually, a choice phrased as gently as possible. He can remain a prisoner in all but name, a ghost kept under lock and key for the rest of his life. Or he can work, advise, calculate, correct in exchange for a new identity, a new future for his family negotiated through channels he cannot fully see. It is not a choice most legal systems would recognize, but it is the kind that exists in the gray margins of statecraft. Over months, resistance erodes under fatigue, fear, and the cold logic that if he must help someone wield the atom as a weapon, he would rather it be a state that already sits on the edge of annihilation than one that dreams of pushing others into the sea. His equations begin to appear on new blackboards. His quiet suggestions make experimental designs safer, more efficient, faster. The reactor in the desert hums a little more steadily. Technicians speak of an anonymous consultant whose insights arrive in plain envelopes and change the way they see the core. Strategically, the impact is significant. An Arab program loses a potential architect, slowing its climb up the nuclear ladder. An Israeli effort gains a mind that smooths over dangerous uncertainties. The operation has achieved what its planners wanted: time. Yet there are consequences that do not fit neatly into intelligence reports. In Tehran, one of Fareed's brightest students, a young man already disillusioned by the Shah's closeness to the West, becomes radicalized by his mentor's disappearance. Convinced that foreign hands have stolen a great Iranian mind, he drifts, years later, into circles where anger hardens into action. The sense of violation, the idea that a man can be plucked from a Tehran street with impunity, feeds a quiet current of resentment that will, in time, merge with larger tides. In diplomatic corridors, friendly smiles become slightly tighter. Governments that might one day condemn such an act in public nonetheless take careful notes in private, asking their own services what they could learn from an operation that removed a problem without leaving a body on a sidewalk. It proves that a small state, feeling encircled, can reach deep into a friendly capital and steal not documents or machines, but a mind. It reveals, too, a darker truth about modern power, that some people are deemed too valuable to kill and too dangerous to leave alone, and so they are simply relocated, their lives rewritten without their consent. Whether that makes the world safer or merely shifts the danger into locked rooms is a question that does not fit easily into briefing slides. Years later, when veterans of intelligence on all sides look back, some will quietly admire the elegance of Farslight. Others will shudder at the precedent it set. Stealing a scientist is cleaner than killing him, but the moral stain is not so easily washed away. In a region where memory is long and humiliation rarely forgotten, operations like this echo for decades. And for anyone watching from the outside, it forces a final, uncomfortable question. When states decide that even your thoughts are strategic assets, where, exactly, does a human being end and a piece of national property begin?